You are about to give birth. There is no hospital, no doctor, no pain relief of any kind. The nearest clean water source is a 2-day walk. You have been in labor for 18 hours. And if something goes wrong tonight, absolutely nothing can save you. This was not unusual. This was Tuesday. For the vast majority of human existence, pregnancy and childbirth were the single most dangerous experiences a human being could face. Not war, not predators, not starvation, childbirth, and the story of how Stone Age women survived it, and frequently didn't, permanently shaped everything about human biology, human society, and human evolution itself. Scientists studying obstetric archaeology have concluded that the human birth process is, by almost any biological standard, absurdly dangerous compared to other primates. And there is a specific evolutionary reason for that. Once you understand it, you will never look at modern medicine the same way. This is what pregnancy actually meant in the Stone Age. And the answer is considerably more disturbing than most people realize. Most animals give birth quickly, relatively easily, with minimal assistance. A chimpanzee delivers in under an hour. A horse is standing within an hour of being born. Even our closest primate relatives, who share roughly 98% of our DNA, have births that are almost comically straightforward compared to ours. Human birth is different, dramatically, dangerously different. Researchers studying comparative obstetrics have identified the core problem. The human pelvis is caught between two competing evolutionary pressures. It needs to be narrow enough for efficient bipedal walking. Walking upright on two legs demands a certain hip geometry. But it also needs to be wide enough to pass a human infant's skull. And the human infant's skull is enormous relative to body size. Evolution apparently did not fully resolve this conflict. It just picked a compromise that leaves both sides slightly unhappy for the rest of time. The result is what anthropologists call the obstetric dilemma. Human babies are born at a far earlier developmental stage than other primates precisely because they cannot get any bigger before they have to leave. A newborn human is essentially still a fetus by most mammal standards, helpless, unable to move independently, skull still partially open. Researchers at the University of New Mexico calculated that to be born as developmentally complete as a chimpanzee infant, a human baby would need to gestate for roughly 21 months, not 9. That gap, those missing 12 months of development, is carried outside the body by the mother, in conditions that, for most of human history, offered absolutely no guarantee of survival. And here is where it gets genuinely strange, because this biological design flaw did not appear recently. Anthropologists studying Homo erectus skeletal remains have found the same narrow pelvic structure appearing roughly 2 million years ago, when our ancestors first committed fully to upright walking. Which means the obstetric dilemma is not a modern problem, it is an ancient one. It is baked into the architecture of being human. Nobody thought to find a better solution for approximately 2 million years. Evolution simply worked around it in other ways. And those workarounds changed everything. Modern pregnancy involves discomfort. Stone Age pregnancy involves surviving a sequence of threats that compounds with each passing month. Start with nutrition. Researchers analyzing stable isotope data from Paleolithic skeletal remains have established that prehistoric diets were highly seasonal and frequently interrupted. There were no prenatal vitamins, no iron supplements, no reliable protein supply guaranteed through winter. A pregnant woman in the Upper Paleolithic was managing the caloric demands of fetal development, while also competing for resources in a group that might number 20 to 50 people, most of whom were also hungry. Folate deficiency, the same deficiency modern medicine specifically targets with folic acid supplements, causes serious neural tube defects in developing fetuses. Iodine deficiency causes cognitive impairment. Iron deficiency causes maternal anemia severe enough to make hemorrhage during childbirth fatal. These were not rare risks in the Stone Age. They were constant background conditions of existence. Bioarchaeological studies of Neolithic and Paleolithic skeletal remains consistently show evidence of nutritional stress during childhood. Harris lines in bone, enamel hypoplasia in teeth, markers left by periods of starvation or severe deficiency during development. Many of those individuals were born to mothers who were nutritionally stressed during pregnancy. Not pampered, not carefully supplemented, hungry. And then there were the parasites. Paleontological research analyzing coprolites, preserved ancient feces, and intestinal remains from Neolithic burial sites has documented extraordinarily high parasite loads in prehistoric human populations. Roundworm, hookworm, tapeworm, whipworm. These were not occasional problems. They were universal companions, and for a pregnant woman, they were directly competing with the fetus for every nutrient she consumed. The polite term is a challenging nutritional environment. The accurate term is that something else was eating your baby's food before your baby could. And the parasite problem was just the beginning, because pregnancy in the Stone Age also had to survive the physical demands of Stone Age life itself. There was no maternity leave. There was no reduced workload. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence from modern hunter-gatherer populations, used by researchers as one of the best available proxies for prehistoric life, consistently shows that pregnant women continued foraging, carrying loads, walking significant distances, and processing food right up until delivery. Studies of the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the most closely studied contemporary hunter-gatherer groups, show that pregnant women walk an average of 7 to 12 kilometers per day during foraging activity. Not because they enjoy it, because stopping means not eating. There was no option to rest. The option was eat or don't eat, move or fall behind. And falling behind, in a world with predators, no emergency services, and winters that could arrive without warning, was not a recoverable situation. Imagine labor, not a modern labor ward with monitors, epidurals, and a call button. Actual Stone Age labor. Imagine 20, perhaps 30 hours of contractions in a rock shelter, in firelight, surrounded by the 3 or 4 people in your group who have done this before. No sterile environment, no surgical option, no way to know if the baby is positioned correctly, no way to know if you will survive the next hour. That is not a hypothetical scenario. That was the statistical reality for most of human existence. The biomechanics of human birth are uniquely punishing. Because of the specific relationship between the human skull and the birth canal, human infants must rotate during delivery, turning their heads to navigate the curved geometry of the maternal pelvis. No other primate does this. In almost every other species, the infant exits facing the same direction as the mother, which means the mother can guide the birth herself. Human infants exit facing away from the mother, which means she physically cannot assist her own delivery safely. Researchers studying birth assistance across primate species published findings in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, confirming that this rotation requirement almost certainly made attended birth. Birth with assistance from other individuals, a biological necessity for Homo sapiens, not a cultural preference. Humans needed help to give birth. They evolved to need it. The group was not optional. The group was the point. And here is what that means for everything that came after. Because if you need other people present to survive childbirth, then social connection is not a luxury. It is a reproductive survival mechanism, the same cooperative instincts that make humans uniquely social. The tendency to form communities, to care for one another, to build relationships, may have been selected for, at least in part, because isolated mothers died during birth at dramatically higher rates than connected ones. Your need to belong may be in part an obstetric inheritance. But even with assistance, the dangers were not resolved. They were only partially managed. Because the most lethal phase of Stone Age birth was not delivery. It was what came immediately after. Postpartum hemorrhage, severe bleeding following delivery, is the leading cause of maternal death globally even today. In regions without adequate medical infrastructure, in the Stone Age, there was no uterotonic medication to slow bleeding. No blood transfusion, no surgical intervention. When a woman hemorrhaged severely after delivery, the only tools available were pressure, heat, plant-based preparations of uncertain efficacy, and the experience of the women in the group who had managed this before. Paleopathological analysis of female skeletal remains from Neolithic burial sites, where age at death can be estimated from bone density and dental wear, consistently shows elevated female mortality in the 15 to 30 age range. The same age range that corresponds to peak reproductive years. That pattern does not appear in male remains from the same sites. Researchers interpret it as direct skeletal evidence of maternal mortality risk built into prehistoric life. not tragic accidents, a statistical pattern repeated across thousands of years of burial evidence. This is the part of prehistoric reproductive history most documentaries avoid. Because the story of Stone Age pregnancy is not only a story of danger and death, it is a story of extraordinary, organized, sophisticated social support that developed specifically to manage that danger. And the evidence for it is more detailed than most people realize. Anthropologists studying alloparenting, the practice of non-parental group members contributing to infant care, have found it documented in virtually every studied hunter-gatherer society on record. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, unrelated group members. Sarah Hardy, one of the leading researchers on cooperative breeding in humans, has argued that this pattern is not incidental. It is the evolutionary adaptation that allowed human infants, far more dependent for far longer than any other primate, to survive at all. The grandmother hypothesis, developed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes based on research with the Hadza, proposes that post-reproductive women, grandmothers, played a direct role in infant and child survival by continuing to forage and provide calories after their own reproductive years ended. This is almost unique among primates. Female chimpanzees do not survive long past reproductive menopause. Human women routinely do. And the reason, Hawkes argues, is that grandmothers were too valuable to die. Nobody thought to question this arrangement for about 200,000 years. It simply worked. But social support during pregnancy and birth went beyond childcare. Ethnobotanical research documenting plant use in contemporary hunter-gatherer populations has identified dozens of plant preparations used specifically around pregnancy and childbirth to manage pain, to slow bleeding, to encourage contractions, to treat infection. Many of these preparations have since been pharmacologically analyzed. Some contain compounds that genuinely do what traditional knowledge claimed. This was not superstition. It was accumulated clinical experience, passed through generations of women who had watched what worked and what didn't, in conditions where getting it wrong meant watching someone die. The knowledge was the technology, and it lived in the group, which raises a question that paleontologists and anthropologists have increasingly focused on in recent years. What happened to women who were separated from their group during pregnancy? Outcasts, women taken in raids, women whose group was killed or scattered. The answer, based on everything we know about the biology and logistics of Stone Age birth, is simple. They almost certainly died. Not always, but the odds, without a knowledgeable group present during delivery and the postpartum period, were catastrophic. Social belonging in the Stone Age was not emotionally preferable. It was the difference between surviving reproduction and not. Getting through birth was only the beginning. Because a Stone Age infant that survived delivery then had to survive the most vulnerable period in human development. Early infancy, in conditions that selected relentlessly for the strongest and most adaptable. Infant mortality rates in prehistoric populations were extraordinary by modern standards. Researchers studying skeletal assemblages from Paleolithic and Neolithic burial sites estimate that between 30 and 50% of children died before the age of 5. In some populations, the figure was higher. Paleodemographic models constructed from Neolithic cemetery data in Europe consistently show that between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 children born did not reach reproductive age. Read that again, 1 in 2. And the primary killers were not the spectacular threats, predators, violence, starvation. The primary killers were infection, respiratory illness, diarrheal disease, and the consequences of weaning. The moment a Stone Age infant moved from exclusive breastfeeding to supplemental solid food was one of the most dangerous transitions of its life. Contaminated water, spoiled food, and a gut microbiome suddenly exposed to environmental pathogens created a mortality window that claimed enormous numbers of children. Researchers studying weaning age in prehistoric populations through nitrogen isotope analysis of infant skeletal remains. Isotope ratios in bone shift measurably during the transition from breast milk to solid food have found evidence that prehistoric weaning happened later than in most modern Western societies. Somewhere between 2 and 4 years of age. This was not sentimentality, it was survival mathematics. Breast milk provided passive immune protection. Every month of extended nursing was a month of reduced infection risk. But extended nursing also meant extended infertility. Breastfeeding suppresses ovulation. Researchers studying interbirth intervals in hunter-gatherer populations have found average spacing of 3 to 4 years between surviving children, far longer than in agricultural or modern populations. A Stone Age woman might have 4 or 5 pregnancies in her lifetime and see 2 or 3 children survive to adulthood. Not because she did anything wrong, because the world was taking its cut of every generation. And this is where the story connects to something that should disturb you about your own biology. Because those filtering conditions, that relentless pressure on infant survival, shape the immune system you are currently running. The inflammatory responses that feel excessive when you have a minor infection. The fever spikes that seem disproportionate to the threat. The hair-trigger allergic reactions to environmental substances that pose no real danger. These are not modern malfunctions. They are ancient calibrations set for a world full of intestinal parasites, respiratory pathogens, and contaminated water, carried forward into a world that largely doesn't have those problems anymore. Your immune system still thinks you live in a rock shelter. It is, in some ways, overqualified for modern life. Here is the question nobody asks about prehistoric midwifery. If there were no written records, no formal medical tradition, no schools, and no institutional memory, how did the knowledge survive? The answer is one of the most underappreciated transmission mechanisms in human history. It survived the same way fire survived, the same way hunting routes survived, the same way the location of water sources survived. It was spoken, it was demonstrated. It was passed from older women to younger women across tens of thousands of years of accumulated experience. Researchers studying the oral transmission of botanical and medical knowledge in contemporary traditional societies have found that detailed, accurate pharmacological knowledge can be preserved orally across hundreds of generations with remarkable fidelity. Not perfectly, but well enough to be clinically meaningful when finally tested by modern pharmacology. The women who attended Stone Age births were not guessing. They had watched dozens of births. Their knowledge came from their mothers and grandmothers, who had watched dozens of births, whose knowledge came from their mothers and grandmothers. The chain stretches back into the deep human past further than any written tradition, and that knowledge included things that would have seemed like magic to anyone who didn't understand the underlying mechanism. Plants that slow bleeding, plants that start contractions, plants that reduce fever in newborns. Positioning techniques for difficult presentations, the specific actions that reduce the severity of postpartum hemorrhage. None of it written, all of it real. The first midwives did not have a title. They did not have a clinic. They had experience, and they had the trust of every pregnant woman in the group, because their experience was the only thing standing between that woman and death. That knowledge took approximately 200,000 years to accumulate. Modern obstetric medicine has been building for roughly 200 years. The debt the second tradition owes to the first is almost incalculable. Your body carries the entire history of Stone Age pregnancy inside it right now. The reason human infants are born helpless and dependent, unable to walk, unable to thermoregulate, unable to feed themselves, is the obstetric dilemma. Evolution bought bipedalism by mortgaging infant development. Your helplessness as a newborn was the price of every human being's ability to walk upright. The receipt is still being paid. The reason you instinctively respond to infant cries with urgency, with a physical stress response that is genuinely difficult to override, is that in the Stone Age, an unattended infant crying in the dark was not an inconvenience. It was a beacon for predators and a signal that something had gone critically wrong. Researchers studying the neurological response to infant distress sounds have found that human adults, including adults with no children of their own, show measurable cortisol spikes within seconds of hearing a baby cry. That response was not designed for 3 a.m. in a suburban house. It was designed for a rock shelter on the edge of a dark landscape. The reason human births overwhelmingly happen at night, documented across cultures by researchers studying birth timing patterns, may be an ancient adaptation. Night births in a mobile hunter-gatherer group are quieter, less visible, less likely to draw attention from predators or rival groups during the vulnerability of delivery. Your body may still be running a birth timing algorithm calibrated for a world that no longer exists. And the reason you feel, somewhere below conscious thought, that you need people around you when things are most difficult, that isolation during crisis feels not just lonely, but genuinely threatening, is that for 200,000 years, isolation during the most dangerous moments of human life was often fatal. The group was not emotional support. The group was the mechanism of survival. That feeling of wrongness when you are alone and struggling is ancient. It is correct. It remembers something your conscious mind has mostly forgotten. The next time you see a newborn infant, that utterly helpless, skull still soft, completely dependent creature, understand what you are looking at. You are looking at the result of a 2 million-year negotiation between walking upright and reproducing safely, a negotiation that has never been fully resolved. A compromise that has cost an uncountable number of lives across human history, and that still costs lives today in every part of the world where the support structures that Stone Age women depended on have disappeared. The midwife network, the grandmother, the experienced women of the group, the accumulated spoken knowledge of 10,000 generations. We did not replace those things when we built hospitals and trained obstetricians. We formalized them. We institutionalized what prehistoric women had been doing in firelight, in silence with their hands and their experience since the beginning of being human. The knowledge was always there. It just took us 200 years to write it down properly. And somewhere in your biology, in the hormones that flood your system in the presence of infants, in the social bonding mechanisms that make human community feel necessary rather than optional, in the immune system still braced for a parasite load that no longer exists, your ancestors' experience of Stone Age pregnancy is still running, still active, still shaping the person you are today. We think of the Stone Age as the past, but your body never entirely left it.